Hello, Husker fans. It is the dog days of summer, or at least on the college sports calendar. It is the Pick Six podcast, though. We're coming to you from one of the most boring days of the sports calendar. It's July 11th. I guess technically the most boring day is the day after the Major League Baseball All-Star game, and that's next Wednesday. But I mean, this one is pretty dang slow, if you ask me. Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland. Tom Chattel is on vacation. Evan, here we come. We actually do have some news to discuss. A assistant coaching change at Nebraska, but it feels like the calm before the storm, right?
It does, man. And the window gets smaller every year, especially us folks in Omaha, where you got the College World Series into late June, and then you got Big Ten Media Days in mid to late July, and you got like that 2 to 3 week period where you try to get away a little bit. And then when we are here, typically there's not a whole heck of a lot going on. It's hot. There's a little bit of pro baseball. And usually we're kind of rehashing storylines getting into the season. So we're hanging in there. Big Ten Media Days are coming up. That lovely trip to Indianapolis that I know we all look forward to every year is coming up. But it's almost time. It kind of creeps up, don't you think? Like media days in late July, and then boom, like here we go, fall camp, and the season comes along. I don't know. Are you ready? Like it feels like we're about at the top of that roller coaster, about to head down.
I'm ready. Yep. I feel more dialed into this season than I have since at least any season since 21 and probably 19. And 3 years ago, Trev got hired in mid-July. So Bill Moose got let go basically, or whatever, paid off to leave at June 30th, 2021. So we had this big, huge story. And then Trev, I think, got hired on the 16th or 17th. So that was unique in that particular month. But yeah, I feel, the last couple of years, they haven't been a blur, but like we've just been focused on other things, getting to Ireland, volleyball day, other things, and we just don't have that now. This is all football, and this is a team that ought to be pretty good. And we were, you know, I think we weren't certain what we were going to see last year. It was kind of a mystery. This year, I think we have a better idea of what they're already good at and what they need to get better at. So I am ready. Yeah, like I'm ready for the season. I'm ready for the storylines to kick in. I'm ready to see Dylan Raiola. I'm ready to see the tweaks that Matt Rhule's made to maybe some of the offensive processes, and then I'm interested to see what new wrinkles they have on defense. And I'm interested to see the Big Ten. And it's the first year of the 12-team college football playoff, so there's just a lot of cool stuff bouncing around. And yeah, I'm ready. I think you'll get a little bit more time next week, and we'll go to Big Ten Media Days here in 2 weeks. So that'll be fun. And we'll talk in a minute about the three players that are going to Big Ten Media Days for the Huskers. But we're going to start with obviously the big news last Friday. Evan Cooper resigned due to personal reasons. He was defensive backs coach at Nebraska. Made a big salary, 670,000, I think. He was also one of Matt Rhule's, top personnel men, scouts, guys that kind of, help put the roster together. He resigns. I don't think it was out of the blue for Nebraska because his replacement, John Butler, comes like 12 hours later in terms of in a report from Pete Thamel. And Pete Thamel, when it comes to reporting on Matt Rhule, is probably pretty solid. That'd be the word I would use, the phrase I would use. Pretty solid. So, I think Butler maybe already talked to a recruit, so like he's there. But it was a pretty surprising move. And then a pretty quick answer in terms of who they were going to hire. I don't know what. I was technically on vacation. I came off vacation. What did you think of that whole 6 p.m. Friday news dump?
Yeah. I too was on vacation. I was in Western Wyoming with my family. I got texts from some friends and people saying, "What's going on with Evan Cooper?" I'm like, I don't know.
Oh my God. You
That
were
was
like,
not
oh my God.
that was not on anybody's radar. And I mean, yeah, like that's not a headline you want to make in early July. Much like Nebraska made headlines a year ago with Bob Wager leaving and then making that transition.
Right.
But like the first thing I guess that struck me about the whole situation was like this isn't a guy who just popped into Nebraska for a year or was planning to. This isn't a guy who was trying to climb the coaching ladder. Like this is someone who'd been with Matt Rhule the entirety of his head coaching career, a guy who was among the very first hires, who was on that first plane with Matt Rhule to Lincoln in December of 2022. A guy who has a family and brought his family to Lincoln. Like this was not something that I think was on anybody's radar that was going to change. And so, it's one of those things where you can simultaneously be kind of surprised and wonder what happened with Cooper, but I think also be impressed about how Matt Rhule was prepared with a guy like John Butler, who'd been a defensive coordinator in the Big Ten and who's been a longtime NFL assistant coach with the Buffalo Bills and the Texans before that. Like that's pretty impressive. And in the long term, maybe that's something that actually ends up being an upgrade for Nebraska. But certainly, it's like it's one of those things you don't want to make a move like that in July if you don't have to, obviously. But it does seem like Nebraska made the most of the situation. And I mean, what do you think, Sam? Like in terms of what you're trading, it kind of feels like they're trading Cooper's prowess for identifying talent and his institutional knowledge of what Matt Rhule wants for a guy who has a little bit more on-field experience, who's more of a veteran coach. Like, do you feel like that's kind of what the trade-off is, maybe that Nebraska's getting here?
I think that's probably accurate. I think he's got a great resume. Certainly, I remember his Penn State defense in 2013. They were pretty good defense, given the fact that some of the players had left, and they were just trying to keep that thing together. And so I was always impressed with how hard Penn State played, really on both sides of the ball, but particularly on defense in 2012 and 2013 when Bill O'Brien was there. And I thought Butler had obviously something to do with that. I mean, the cover wasn't completely bare, but they were hamstrung more than most programs. And that became obvious when James Franklin got there and they had a couple of rough years in Franklin's first 2 years before they won the Big Ten in 2016. And so, I think he had that resume. And then, of course, he spent the last however many years in the NFL, and that's the highest level of football. And he had one of the best secondaries in the NFL for multiple years. And he did that without necessarily an elite corner right off the bat. They have two good safeties. One was an All-Pro, Jordan Poyer. I think Micah Hyde might have been a Pro Bowler. Just tough guys, not necessarily jump off the screen, but they're really good at what they do. And they've had decent corners there. And he got passed over for a defensive coordinator promotion with the Bills. Sean McDermott, the head coach there, hired the linebackers coach who's 40. And I think Butler's older than that by some margin, a couple of maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think when that happens, what he decided is, yeah, the writing's on the wall. I'm never going to be the guy that I want to be here. And now I'm going to be talking to a position group of the defensive backs, and I'm going to have to channel language that I may or may not agree with to guys who know me well enough to know that I wouldn't necessarily be telling them exactly what I really believed. And so he left, and then he didn't get any job offers. He left kind of late. I can't remember exactly when he left, Evan, but I think it was like February.
February, yeah.
And that's a little late. It's not a little late in the NFL per se, although it is still kind of late in the NFL too, because a lot of the teams had already been eliminated and had already kind of started making their coaching moves back in January. And so he hadn't gotten any bites. Coaching staffs don't change a ton from March through August. The coaching convention in the AFCA is obviously in January because that's when everybody's looking for a job. And so this job opens up. And I think Nebraska's went and gotten somebody who probably won't be cheap. I think he'll well, maybe, I don't know. He left his contract, so he wasn't fired. So he's probably going to make a competitive salary. I don't know if he'll make as much as Cooper did. And he'll be able to come in and give them, expert insight. I don't know that he's going to be Evan Cooper to these players, but he is a person that's going to come in and fire them up and do all the rest. So I think it seems like a reasonable hire to make at this moment. Last year when Wager he got arrested, right? And he was charged with open container and I can't remember something else too, a DUI or,
Yeah.
reckless driving, something. I don't want to be incorrect about that, but he was stopped and charged with something. So he resigned. and they replaced him with a guy that's still on the staff that you wrote a story about.
Yeah. Josh Martin. Yeah.
And now Josh Martin may be able to become a full-time assistant again, right? Because they have this unlimited coach rule. So he could end up being the tight ends coach or some version of that. And Marcus Satterfield is the coordinator who also works with the tight ends. But last time they just went with the guy that was right there, right? This
They did.
time they did not call up a GA. They went and got a guy, which tells you something about A, Cooper's impact in that room, and B, the expertise of the guy. I couldn't tell you who their GA is with the corner and with the defensive backs. I should know that. But they've made a lot of staff changes in the offseason, and I don't know exactly who it was.
Well, the other twist to this thing that I think is interesting, Sam, is this notion that he's going to be a contender to be the defensive coordinator for
Yeah,
Nebraska in a year or two. Like,
yeah,
it's just fascinating to me because everyone thought Tony White could have been gone last year, and he easily could have been running his own program at this point. He's not. If things continue on the same trajectory, then you would think it's a pretty good chance that he'll be leading a program elsewhere next year. And then you look at Butler and the reason he left Buffalo in that story he did with The Athletic. I mean, he was pretty clear. He wants to run a defense at the college or at the professional level. He didn't feel like that opportunity was there at Buffalo. And at Nebraska, it seems like in a year or less than a year, that could be an opportunity. So I'm curious too to as we go along, see kind of how that plays out. Because why would you leave a good situation in Buffalo if you were content to be the secondary coach there? Now you're taking the same job at Nebraska. You would think there is at least some talk about being a candidate if and when that job were to open up down the road. So I think that's the other wrinkle that's really interesting is that's a central reason why Butler was available,
yeah,
and he kind of checks off a couple boxes for Nebraska potentially in that regard.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that he's got a lot of expertise and can probably call a defense and do all kinds of things. And I certainly appreciate that. Nebraska has other guys on their staff too that may have some interest in inhabiting that role. Dvorak is young, but you never know. There's also guys on that staff who may be, what do you want to call it, upgraded to assistant roles now in this unlimited coaching thing, and you may see those guys as the standard bearers of the 3-3-5. Like Nebraska's committed to this system and this scheme. So we'll see what happens there. It's also possible that Butler will move on after a year and he will go somewhere else and become a
Sure.
coordinator. Um, my hunch is he can get that job, and it's I think probably what had happened. Maybe I'm wrong. Is he maybe thought he was going to get that job at at Buffalo, and he didn't. And it sounds like he really enjoyed working there, and everybody there kind of liked working with each other. They had good football teams, and then he didn't get it. And then I think I actually, again, salute the guy for this. Some people will say, well, you should keep your job and just deal with the fact that you didn't get it. I think he was probably honest enough with himself to say, this next year won't be the best version of me after I didn't get a job that I thought I should get. And going to Nebraska, there's no expectations of that. You know, when you take the job at Nebraska, you're not going to go in there and call plays. You already know that. So it's like a fresh reset. Nebraska doesn't owe him anything, except the money that they've contracted to pay him. So I think that'll be helpful. I think he'll do a heck of a job because he probably does feel like he might be auditioning for the defensive coordinator job. So he's going to work his tail off. And so I think it'll be a good hire. They haven't announced it yet officially, but I think that'll eventually happen once all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted to see how much money he makes. Okay, the Big Ten Media Days. That is July 24th. Nebraska will be there. And the three players that are going to be involved for the Huskers, interesting selections. Ben Scott, center, Ty Robinson, and Isaac Gifford. What do you think of that trio?
Well, I thought Isaac Gifford was the most obvious choice. Like if I was setting odds, I thought Gifford was an obvious one. And then, you know, I I kind of went through this exercise a couple days ago and just kind of named like six guys. I thought maybe Thomas Fidone, tight end, would be a possibility. Thought Nash Hutmaker maybe would be a possibility. But these guys make a ton of sense. I mean, Ty Robinson, star defensive lineman in his sixth year. He's well spoken, thoughtful. He'll do a good job in Indianapolis. Ben Scott is the former transfer from Arizona State. He'll be a second year starter. So you have kind of the portal perspective on things there too. And then in Gifford, you have the local guy from Lincoln Southeast. So I think it's a good cross section of the team, and I think it reflects the strength of 2024 Nebraska too, where you've got both lines, the defensive line, the offensive line, and then the secondary is awfully deep. And so you've got Gifford back there, who's been a long time starter and contributor. And as you can, I'm sure, agree with, like all three of these guys are pretty thoughtful, good quotes. They're going to do a good job in front of the cameras, good representatives of the university. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. It's always kind of fun to see who they choose and to kind of play that guessing game ahead of time. And I think it makes a lot of sense. What do you think?
All seniors. And so I think they're trying, there's a little bit of a, maybe a little bit of a conversation here if you think about it. One, you got a sixth-year guy in Ty Robinson who probably didn't have to come back, could have went to the NFL,
Mhm.
and probably would be in a training camp right now as a draft pick, chose to return, had already graduated. So this isn't about his grades and this isn't about a degree. Although he might be able to get a master's. He's so smart, he might get a master's. We'll have to ask him that. But this is a guy that chose to come back, really just to be a leader. So he's kind of one of the leaders of the team. Isaac Gifford, you said it, Lincoln guy, and transfer. Ben Scott, Arizona State. Um, just a little bit of everything. And they weren't going to bring the quarterback, and everybody knows that.
Right.
Um, that wasn't going to happen. So, I think everybody was kind of clear on what was going to happen, but I did think maybe Fedoni. I did. I thought maybe Emmett Johnson or Ramir Johnson, even though nobody's quite clear what Ramir's role is going to be, that he would be a good representative of the program. So those I thought maybe a different name on offense. Um, Ben Scott is a good quote. He's not gonna go there and have everybody in stitches. He's a pretty serious young man,
Yeah.
based on the conversations we've had with him. Maybe he's a cut up away from the field, but he's always been pretty serious for us. Like Ethan Piper last year, right?
Oh, he was outstanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Ethan Piper's an anecdotalist. He's he used to be an actor in high school. Like that's just a whole different. He's a rock on tour. I mean, he can kind of hold court. Ben Scott reminds me of his position coach, Donovan Raiola. They're
Yep.
they're actually they're sharp, but they're a little quiet, a little taciturn, a little very focused and on the task at hand, and he transferred to Nebraska to play for Raiola. So there you go.
Hmm.
Raiola, sorry. It'll be an interesting group. As we're earlier, the Nebraska, I'm just inserting this as a topic. Wilson Moore is not with us, but we're going to talk about this. The Nebraska men's basketball team earlier released its non-conference schedule. Uh, it's something. It's actually smart, and I'll bring this up in a minute, but here we go. October 27th, Grand Valley State's the exhibition. November 4th, they start their season against Texas Rio Grande Valley. What day is November 4th? Because they used to do this basically all on the same night, Monday. Okay, so
Hmm.
Nebraska's beginning at the earliest possible time. They're starting November 4th. Texas Rio Grande Valley on the 9th, Bethune-Cookman, then Fairleigh Dickinson on the 13th, St. Mary's and Sioux Falls, at Creighton, South Dakota, North Florida, the Diamond Head Classic, where Nebraska is the best team there, and Southern. I mean, what do you think?
Well, it worked for him last year, this kind of
Yeah.
schedule. You had a nice little on-ramp into league play. They had their roles figured out with all the new pieces on the roster. I think they saw the blueprint last year and said, let's run that back. Nebraska's gone the other way sometimes through the years where they've tried to schedule hard and then you fall behind and you don't win them and your confidence is shot and you kind of feel like you're in the hole for league play. I think they've kind of just taken the approach of like, let's stack the wins. You got your big game at Creighton. And then you just know that league play is going to be a grind and you're going to have plenty of chances to earn those quality wins. And it's the expanded league this year with all the new West Coast teams too. So, I think it's a reflection of this idea that why challenge yourself overly, especially as a new, kind of a younger, new look team. Stack those wins, stack some confidence, build some chemistry, and then do what you do in league play. How about you?
Pretty much the same. I think the reason that they've embraced this is, yeah, here's the key. You can play this schedule. And last year, Nebraska played this schedule and they ended up playing a really damn good team at home in Duquesne.
Yeah.
And so, like, Duquesne ends up in the second round of the NCAA tournament. That ends up being a quality win for Nebraska. Like, and then Duquesne, I think, won the Atlantic 10 tournament or whatever. So like there was a game there where I think they kind of knew ahead of time, hey, this is a really good team, and if we can get them, we can beat them in here, then we're going to be in really good shape, and they were able to do that. But you got to win by blowouts. So here's the thing: the NET takes into account margin of victory, and other metrics do too. And if you're able to win these games by a bunch of points, then it makes you look better. That's probably the important aspect that I would try to reinforce to people is it's possible looking at this schedule, it's not going to surprise me, Evan, if they only lose one game. The Diamond Head Classic is you never know quite how that's going to go. You go all the way out there, you might have a bad night shooting, you might lose a game, but the way it sets up right now, that field is not super strong. Nebraska should be competitive there. So what I would say is it isn't just getting out of this thing with one loss, it's winning by certain margins so that you look good in the NET. So I think Hoiberg has found an identity not only in scheduling but also with the program. The flip side of that coin is that the NCAA tournament is typically against teams that are better than the teams other than Creighton and St. Mary's that they're going to face here. And so sometimes what you want to do, and this is true of baseball too, you want to put some teams in your schedule early in the year that are going to put you in position later in the year to go to those NCAA tournament sites. I love the fact, for example, that Nebraska baseball is playing LSU in the Frisco Classic. I don't know, it probably won't be the best version of LSU. Nebraska may win the game 11-7. It might lose 11-7. It'll probably be a little high scoring. But the reality is you've got to process playing those teams so that when you go to the NCAA tournament and all of a sudden on day two or on day one, you're playing Florida, who ended up being a pretty good team going all the way to the CWS. You feel like, all right, let's fall back on our training. We played LSU earlier this year. Maybe they'll have a 3-game series against some other team. I don't really know. And all of a sudden you feel a little bit better about it. And you just feel like, okay, we've been here. We played that game. We played this team, and we played them in the South. And so, like, I like that Nebraska baseball did that. I wonder if Nebraska basketball just has enough tough teams on the schedule that it properly prepares them for the big game in March.
Yeah, maybe. I think Nebraska basketball is scheduling like an SEC baseball team would do, which is a little bit easier. Stack your home games, and then league play is going to be good enough. Like if you handle your business in league play in men's basketball, you're going to be in the NCAA tournament. Not the case on the baseball side where you have to schedule a little bit harder early on. So I think Nebraska found a little niche here. Get the teams into PBA where they've been really good. Again, build that confidence. I think basketball, especially, like if you start strong and you define roles, that makes a big difference when the calendar flips to January. So, uh, yeah, it seems like there's a pattern there, and obviously you got to take care of business. What's the margin? Like you talk margin of victory. Is there some threshold there, like win by double digits or anything like that, or is it just generally speaking?
I don't know,
Okay.
but it does matter.
Yeah.
And it's a source of some conversation, that like teams are just blowing out bad teams, and so like that looks better than beating a team by one. And now they're going to incorporate this thing called wins against bubble, which is like a tool that puts you in a cohort and says, okay, how are you doing against the cohort? Which is maybe a bulwark against playing all these bad teams. I don't know. I think the number of teams that in the tournament is actually just about perfect, but there seems to be a lot of consternation about how those 4 or 5 final teams are selected, and I do feel like you're going to see an expansion. Maybe only by 4, maybe by 8, maybe by more, but I think you're going to see an expansion so that what'll happen is everybody will say, all right, you know, you don't have anything else to say if you're the 96 team. Just shut up. You know, we'll see. Because I think they want to expand the tournament, Evan, because they want to get more mid majors in. I don't think it's about the power conference teams. I think it's about getting the Cinderellas or getting the teams that are 26-7 and lost in their conference tournament game. And they're a good MAC team, that kind of thing. But yeah, that'll be interesting to watch. I wanted to talk briefly about the roster limit news that came out. It appears, again, this came from ESPN and others. It appears that the roster limit is going to be somewhere around 100 to 110, maybe 115. And this is worth reminding folks that Nebraska's roster is 145, but that there might be a phase-in program that allows teams to draw down on a more graduated basis as opposed to getting that done right away. It's interesting because obviously Nebraska had very much hoped to have a very large roster, and it appears that that won't be possible, let's say 5 years from now. Like they won't have a 145-man roster in 2029.
Yeah, and I can understand the reasoning, right? Like when you talk about revenue sharing and the cost of bringing in players, like if you're a team, if you're a university, like you want to kind of limit your exposure, I suppose, or limit your costs in that way. But yeah, I mean, Nebraska has found or has embraced this idea under Matt Rhule, certainly, of having a bigger roster so you can have more stations at practice and have more guys going at once. And if you're a developmental program, that gives you more prospects to coach up and potentially turn into breakout guys. Like, I mean, you think about if this 110 man rule had been in place last year, would a guy like James Williams have been on the roster to break out the way that he did? And maybe he could become, a bigger piece this year. Like guys with stories like that, I think are the ones who potentially could suffer more because you just don't have enough room for everybody. So, Matt Rhule will adjust. Obviously, how many times have we heard him say, just tell me the rules and I'll adapt, and Nebraska will adapt. But it is curious that it does seem like it's going to affect Nebraska more than most schools that are already around that threshold or that number. So we'll see. I think in the short term, obviously it's something Nebraska's gonna have to adjust to, but I don't think it's a huge deal personally. Over the long term, there's probably going to be some hand wringing about the walk-on program and how that affects that. But I think we've seen Nebraska and Matt Rhule have adjusted to rules on the fly pretty well, and it seems like this is another area where they'll adapt and be okay in the long term.
Yeah, I think as I think about the way that Matt Rhule has sort of built his program, there's multiple different buckets that they've used. One of the buckets is the one that you just said, the come to camp as an older guy bucket, where they added Jalen Gramstad, Bryson Hayes, the kid from Germany who's a freshman, but he's like 23,
Yeah.
James Williams, a few other guys. So those aren't even like transfers. Those are just guys that they are transfers, but it's not what we imagine as a transfer portal because they're joining the program in the summer. They're JUCO guys, they're, NAI, whatever. That's a handful of guys. Then you have the transfer, like the player that's like from wherever, who comes probably in January, maybe over the summer. Then you have the high school players. And I would say that like they have signed some walk-ons for sure. There's some in-state walk-ons, and then a few guys from outside the state. They get a kid, I think, from Wisconsin, and I think one from Minnesota. Interesting players. You don't really know how they're going to pan out, but the majority of the guys that they've added are scholarship kids, and they've added more scholarship style players than they have scholarships. Now, how that's all getting worked out, whether it's an NIL and kind deal, I'm not exactly sure. They're not going to have to necessarily say all that. They can work that out with 1890 however they like. But they have like 28 or 29 or 30 defensive backs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Though all 30 of those guys are not going to be here in 2 years because some of those guys are not like, I just want to be on Nebraska's team and I don't care if I ever play. I came here from, 900 miles away. And if I don't think I'm going to play by my, redshirt sophomore year, I'm out of here. Like I gotta go. I gotta go somewhere else and play football. And they're gonna run up against that. Like they've got I don't know how many redshirt freshman DBs they have, but they're not all gonna stay. And they
Yeah.
weren't all going to stay. Like, and it's not because Nebraska was going to run them out. They were just going to be like, well, I want to play college football. And you just told me I'm going to be a third stringer for until maybe my senior year. So, boo, I'm gone. Like, I got to go. I got to go, pursue my career dreams elsewhere. And so that was already coming. Whether it was going to come this offseason or the offseason after, the roster was going to call. What's going to change is they can't just perpetually keep adding players, having them compete. The very best players stay. Some pretty good players who want to play end up leaving. They're not going to be able to do that at the same rate that I think they've been like adding specifically defensive backs, maybe offensive linemen. Like they have a lot of offensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if all those guys are going to want to stay, but the DBs are the one position where they've had just a ton of guys, and I just don't know what's going to happen. So that's what I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and they'll adjust and it'll be fine. But yeah, the churn, I suppose, will be a little bit less. Hey, can we talk too quick about this Big Red preview, so-called,
Yeah,
where Nebraska, it announced this week, is having on August 3rd an evening practice inside Memorial Stadium that'll be open to the public for the per person price of $25.
yeah,
And uh, other teams are doing this. Ohio State is doing this for $50 a pop. Uh, the Buckeyes are right now. So Nebraska's not alone in this idea. What did you make of that, Sam, when you heard that? Is this just kind of the reality today? Is this a reflection on Nebraska and its NIL situation? What kind of was your impression when you saw that this is almost like a pay-per-view fan day for Nebraska a month before the season opener?
yeah. Sign of the times. One. Certainly, it's a way of raising money. I think they'll try to figure out the right price point. They've decided on $25. I think that's probably because they think they'll get a pretty good turnout. Ohio State's price point is higher because they're probably like, we're gonna get 4,000 people whether we charge 50 or 25, so we might as well charge the higher number. I think Nebraska will get a pretty good turnout at 25. Um, it depends on what happens at the practice. If it's getting in the stadium and you're kind of sitting there and you have to sit on the hot side of the stadium on August 3rd, you know how that works.
Sure.
So can everybody fit on one side? Is it going to be one of these things where you pay your $25 and oh, I'm sitting, 93 rows up and that person over there is sitting really good seat. Like,
Well,
well,
it's all GA. It's all GA.
I understand that. I get that. I totally understand that. I just there's people that can buy up really large groups, block seats because they want to, whatever, and then give the tickets to people. Like, are the seats going to be available? Like, and I assume they will, to be clear. And then what's the program? How good is the programming? Because, let's say Matt Rhule talks for 10 minutes and he gets on the mic and he's really good on the mic. I think we all agree with that. He gets on the mic for 10 minutes and talks to everybody, then people are going to be like, that was a really well spent 25 bucks. I got to go watch practice. I watched Dylan Raiola throw a couple touchdowns. And at the end, Matt Rhule got on the mic and he was talking. And it kind of got me fired up. And then it's worth the money. Um, so it's kind of a combination of like you want to support the NIL, but you also want to provide the kind of programming that maybe makes somebody say, I'll be back to do that again next year. And I might even pay more. So, like, I think that it could end up being a great bargain. When I saw 25, I'll say this. I thought that's reasonable. I
Yeah.
thought that was more reasonable than Ohio State's 50. To me, the Ohio State 50 is just some rich dudes buying up some seats and here's how many tickets we sold. Like I just don't think you're going to get a family of four to go sit down and watch an Ohio State practice for 200 bones.
No, no, I don't think so.
A
And
family of four for 100? Maybe.
and Nebraska's practices that we've seen have been interesting. I think more interesting than some past teams under previous coaches. Like they move constantly. There's not a lot of standing around.
Right.
I think the individual player drills are interesting. The 7-on-7 stuff they do, like you can glean some things from that, especially a month out from the season. Give me your estimated total. How many people are going to show up and pay to show up to that practice? Nebraska had 60,000 for the spring game. Is this 10? Is this 5? Is this 20? What are you expecting?
5 digits. So at least 10. And we're talking paid,
Mhm.
like it could be quite a few more than that. Paid isn't quite the same as show up. What I'm sure they're hoping for is a nice night. Now, August 3rd, at what time is it at?
6:30.
Now, say that could be 110 degrees. You just never know. And I'm not exaggerating. 100 in that stadium, if it's 97 at 6:30, it's 110. It just is. It's in the ground a little bit. It's hot as heck. So I'm sure what they're hoping for is 82, and then by 6:30, it feels like 79, and you're going to get a really good turnout. Of course, it could rain. Um, I don't know that the rain would hurt it that much. So yeah, 5 digits. What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to say 15,000. I think people are going to be juiced up for the season. As you said at the beginning, like this feels like it's the focus is more on football for Nebraska right now than it's been in a number of years. I think people are excited to see the former five-star quarterback and to see the defense. And I think it's starting to normalize this idea of like paying to support the university so they can acquire talent. I think that's more of a mainstream idea now than it was even a year ago. And so I think people are going to be willing to show up and say, hey, we can watch something, be entertained, help our university. So yeah, I'll go 15. You never know with Nebraska, Husker Nation, they tend to show out. So that's what I'll say.
Interest right now is fairly high. It's not it's not what it was in 2019. I remember that, and everybody thought Adrian Martinez literally was Patrick Mahomes. It's not quite there, but it's pretty high. And I think, and for what it's worth, I think Nebraska's kind of laid low this summer. I mean, I know Rule's done, they did the staff things and he had a presser and that was good, but like they haven't went out and done some big fan tour. I think they're very much in an earn it mode, and they know that. Like Rule put out a tweet earlier this week. I think they did their part. Now it's our turn to do our part or whatever it was. And he was referencing all the other sports that had won big in the previous year. And so I do feel like Rule feels a sense of, you know, there's an opportunity here and we need to do our part. And so I feel like they've kind of flown under the radar a bit. And he's not out there, the Joel Klatt interview was good. Klatt did a nice job, but I didn't think Rule was like out over his skis or anything. Like he was pretty straightforward and we got to earn this and we got to get better and he didn't overdo it with Raiola. Uh, so I feel like they've tried really hard to be um, just about their business this summer, and we'll see. We'll see what they're able to. I think there's an incredible opportunity in my mailbag today. I said Nebraska's ceiling, and I'm not kidding, is the college football playoff. And the reason I say that is because the way that you get in is you got to win at least 10. And there is a possibility. It's not likely, but there's a possibility Nebraska can do that. And I'm not saying it's not going to be my season prediction. It's not. It's not going to be that. But yeah, it's there. There's a chance to do it. And I'm sure they all feel that opportunity. It's right there in front of them. And they've got old lines, old offensive and defensive lines. They'll have an opportunity. So, yeah. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think that ceiling makes a lot of sense. If you're old in the trenches as they are, if you upgrade potentially as they appear to have at quarterback, you have continuity with your defensive coordinator. I think the skill position players, especially the receivers, could be major upgrades. I think Jalen Lloyd could have a really big season. Malachi Coleman with a year of college under his belt, like that. And if you have Jamal Banks kind of become what he has been, or Isaiah Nayor, like that's a group that could be really good too. And then the schedule lines up, as you've said, like it's been a long time since Nebraska's started at home and been able to kind of have that on ramp to a season the way that it seems like schools like Michigan do every year. So like that's I think it's this alignment of the roster and where Nebraska is, and also the schedule and how it sets up. So it does feel like the predictions nationally about Nebraska being one of the top breakout candidates in the country are founded. So it all has to come together. They got to earn it on the field and so on and so forth. But I think that's when you talk about the range. It's really high. And then you add into that the fact that Nebraska's been so abysmal in one score games. If just through sheer mathematical odds that evens out a little bit and Nebraska wins a few of those, that can make a big difference too.
That was the ping of a pop can. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's going to be interesting. The next time we come to you, it'll be the Big Ten Media Days preview, which will probably come the Monday before we leave. So we're going to leave on Tuesday, the 23rd. We won't be there for day one, and we will be there day two, day three. So we will preview the Big Ten Media Days on Monday, July 20. What is that? First?
Yep.
Yep. So, yeah, something like that. July 22nd. So we'll be previewing them. That's the next time you'll hear from us. Evan, have a good week off. Yeah, thanks for listening, Husker fans. This is the Pick Six Podcast.